I never imagined that the happiest week of my life would be followed by one of the most shocking betrayals I've ever experienced. My name is Natalie Reynolds, and at 29 years old, I inherited something life-changing: 3 upscale apartments from my grandmother, Eleanor. And you know what's wild? I didn't tell anyone, not even my husband, James. I kept that inheritance a secret. At the time, I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to do, but thank God I listened to my instincts. Because just 7 days, yep, 7 days after James and I got back from our honeymoon, his mother Diana showed up at my front door with a notary and a stack of documents, ready to take everything my grandmother had left me. That gut feeling, it saved my entire financial future in ways I never saw coming. But before I tell you exactly how, my mother-in-law tried to steal everything from me. Do me a quick favor. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up and protect something that's rightfully yours. Because this was a battle I never expected to fight. See, my relationship with my grandmother Eleanor was something truly special. She was born back in 1935, in a time when women weren't expected to be financially independent. But Eleanor wasn't like other women. She refused to be boxed in by anyone's expectations. When my grandfather passed away suddenly in 1963, she was left with a tiny insurance payout and a mountain of questions about her future. Most women back then would have quickly remarried. That's what everyone expected her to do. But not my grandma. She used to tell me all the time, growing up, Natalie, never put your financial security in anyone else's hands, not even someone you love. And she lived by that advice. Instead of finding another husband, Grandma Eleanor took a job as a secretary at a real estate firm. But she wasn't just there to answer phones and type memos. Oh no. She was watching, learning, studying how the market worked, observing patterns that others missed. When the real estate market dipped in the early 1970s, while most people panicked, Eleanor made her move. She used every bit of her savings to buy her first property, a small apartment in a neighborhood everyone else thought wasn't worth the investment. But Grandma saw potential. And from there she kept going, buying low when others were scared, holding those properties as the neighborhoods transformed and values skyrocketed. By the time I was in college, she had built herself a modest but solid real estate portfolio. But here's the thing. I had no idea just how big it really was. We were close, really close. I visited her every single Sunday. We'd sit together drinking coffee, eating her homemade scones, laughing about silly stuff. But even with how close we were, she kept her finances completely private from everyone, even me. That changed 2 years ago. She was diagnosed with cancer, and everything shifted. Those last 6 months of her life were the most bittersweet time we ever shared. I moved into her spare bedroom to help take care of her, and during those quiet nights, sitting side by side, watching the sunset from her balcony, she started opening up. Natalie, she said one evening, her frail hands wrapped around her tea mug, I've built something I'm proud of, and soon it's going to be yours. But promise me you'll be smart about it. At the time, I figured she meant some family jewelry, maybe a little savings account. I had no idea what she really meant. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, I was devastated, completely shattered. I couldn't think straight for weeks. It wasn't until the reading of her will that I finally understood what she had been trying to tell me. To my granddaughter, Natalie Reynolds, the attorney, began unfolding the papers. I leave my entire real estate portfolio, consisting of 3 properties, My hands were shaking as he slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside were the deeds to all 3 apartments, fully paid off. No mortgages, no debt. The first, a luxury 2-bedroom apartment downtown, valued at almost $950,000. The second, a gorgeous waterfront condo in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, worth around $1.2 million. And the third, a cozy 1-bedroom in an up-and-coming area, valued at about $500,000. And get this, the first 2 were already rented out to long-term tenants with excellent payment histories, steady income rolling in every month. The third was the apartment Grandma had lived in. And now it was mine. This can't be right, I stammered, staring at the papers. The attorney, Frank Wilson, who'd been my grandmother's lawyer for decades, smiled kindly. "It's very real," he said. "Your grandmother was an exceptionally shrewd investor. She wanted you to have this. She wanted you to be financially independent, no matter what life throws your way." The days that followed were a whirlwind: paperwork, meetings with property managers, learning how to be a landlord basically overnight. It was overwhelming, but also empowering. The rental income alone from the 2 leased apartments totaled over $7,000 a month. More than enough to handle property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and still have plenty left over. I decided to keep the smallest apartment, Grandma's, as my home. It felt right. A place that was filled with her energy, her memories, her presence. And here's the thing. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my coworkers, and definitely not James, who I'd only just met around that time. Why? Because I'd learned the hard way in the past. Money changes things. People, relationships. I'd had an ex-boyfriend who borrowed thousands from me without even asking. Because apparently, my money was our money. Another guy subtly pushed me to cover dinners, vacations, even rent once he realized I made more than him. Each time, it chipped away at me. My trust, my sense of security. So, when I met James just 6 months after Grandma passed, I was still grieving, still figuring out how to manage this new reality, and still determined to keep my financial cards close to my chest. He knew I lived in my grandmother's apartment. I never hid that. But he didn't know about the other 2 properties, or the rental income, or the trust documents sitting quietly in my filing cabinet. It wasn't deception. At least, that's what I told myself. It was protection. James was everything I hoped for. Charming, ambitious, and kind. He worked as a marketing executive for his family's business. He came from what he called comfortable money. Not filthy rich, but definitely privileged. We connected instantly. Bonded over our love of historical documentaries, spicy food, and cheesy dad jokes. Unlike my past relationships that dragged on for years without real commitment, James felt different. 3 months in, we were already talking about marriage. 6 months in, we were planning it. Through it all, I kept my finances private, quietly managing my properties, paying my share of our expenses, and funneling the rental income into a separate account that I never touched except for maintenance, repairs, and taxes. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't eat at me sometimes. Those late nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering, was this the right thing? Was keeping this a secret fair? Was it a breach of trust? Or was it just being smart? And every time doubt crept in, I'd hear Grandma's voice in my head. Financial independence is not something you compromise, Natalie. Not for anyone. James proposed on New Year's Eve, 9 months after we met, standing in the middle of the park where we had our first date. Snowflakes falling, he pulled out a ring his grandmother's diamond reset into a sleek platinum band. "I can't wait to build a future together," he said, slipping it onto my finger. We're going to have an amazing life. And in that moment, I said yes, completely without hesitation. Little did I know that future was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. Our wedding planning was, well, let's just call it a preview of what was coming. I got my first real glimpse of the Bennett family dynamics the night I met James's parents officially. We were invited to dinner at their sprawling mansion in the suburbs. 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, with luxury cars lined up like showroom models, and a perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it had never seen a single weed. James's mother, Diana, greeted me with air kisses that didn't quite reach my cheeks. She looked me up and down, her eyes scanning everything from my shoes to my hairstyle, like she was assessing inventory. "So Natalie," she said over appetizers, her voice smooth but cool, "James tells us you work in publishing. That must be interesting." The way she said interesting made it sound like she actually meant boring. Or worse, insignificant. I smiled, keeping my cool. "I love it. I'm an editor. Been doing it for years." Her eyes flicked toward James, then back to me. "And your family? James mentioned your parents live out of state." "Yes. They retired to Arizona a couple of years ago." Diana nodded her fingers, circling the rim of her wine glass. "And you live in your grandmother's old apartment, correct? How quaint. Keeping it in the family." Quaint? Cute. It was the kind of comment that sounds harmless on the surface but is loaded with subtle judgment. I could already feel her mentally cataloging me: modest job, middle-class upbringing, no flashy pedigree. And what stood out most was how quickly the conversation shifted to, of course, money. She asked questions that were dressed up as small talk, but were anything but. Little probes into my financial life. "Do you plan to stay in publishing long? It's such a volatile industry these days." Or James said, "Your grandmother owned her apartment. Did she leave you anything else?" "Jewelry investments." I kept my answers vague, but honest. Just some personal items. Grandma was practical. It was exhausting. Every answer felt like walking through a minefield. Wedding planning was no better. Diana had opinions about everything. The venue, the flowers, the guest list, the dress. When I suggested a small, elegant ceremony at a historic library that held sentimental meaning for me, she physically recoiled. "The Bennetts have always married at St. Mark's Cathedral," she said firmly, followed by a reception at the Windsor Hotel. "It's tradition." Never mind that both locations were ridiculously expensive and way outside the budget James and I had discussed. When I raised the issue, Diana just waved it off. "We'll contribute." A Bennett wedding reflects the family. Her smile was tight, but her tone was final. Translation: you can have input, as long as it matches what she wanted. I found myself boxed into a corner. Either reveal my financial situation, which would open a whole new can of worms, or accept their money and the strings that would inevitably come attached. I compromised. We went with the cathedral fine tradition wins, but I put my foot down on the reception. We held it at a charming rooftop venue downtown, claiming it had special significance to us. Which wasn't entirely untrue. It was the place where James and I had shared our first real heart-to-heart about life and dreams. The wedding day itself was beautiful, if slightly tense. Diana's disapproving glances at my less-than-traditional gown didn't go unnoticed. Nor did her barely concealed annoyance at the band we'd chosen instead of the formal string quartet she'd recommended. But honestly, none of that mattered. When James took my hands and spoke his vows, everything else faded. I was marrying the man I loved. That was what mattered. After the wedding, we made a mutual decision to keep separate finances while maintaining a joint account for household expenses. James didn't even question it. "Mom and Dad always did the same," he said. "Mom has her family money. Dad has the business. It works for them. It was a relief to hear, though deep down I wondered how separate Diana's finances really were. Something told me Richard the Patriarch still had more say than anyone admitted. Our honeymoon was a dream. 2 weeks in Greece Island, hopping, drinking wine on sun-soaked patios, laughing like teenagers. It felt like the beginning of something wonderful. We came home ready to start our life together. James sold his downtown loft, and we merged our lives into my apartment, our apartment now. He used the money from the loft sale to renovate the kitchen and bathroom. Things were smooth, happy, simple, at least at first. It started small, subtle. One day, as we were walking through the apartment, discussing backsplash tiles with the contractor, James casually said, "Eventually, we'll knock down this wall. Open concept. And when kids come along, we'll need somewhere bigger anyway." I froze. I kind of like the apartment the way it is. It has a lot of sentimental value. He smiled, squeezing my hand. "Of course, I get that. But you know how it is. Family money's about building on what came before. My parents started with Dad's small office and turned it into the company. Each generation builds on the last. We should do the same." His tone was sweet, even excited, but something about it sent a chill through me. There it was. That expectation, that assumption about how family finances worked, about how wealth should be leveraged, about how things that were mine were somehow now part of a collective future. It wasn't that James was greedy, not at all. He was generous, hardworking, loving. But he had been raised in a world where assets, investments, family wealth were treated like community property for the family name, his family name, and it was becoming clearer with every passing day that his mother felt the same. Strongly, Sunday visits started, like clockwork. Every week, at 2 p.m., sharp Diana would arrive with some small pointed gift, a set of dish towels. "These are from Italy, much nicer than the basic ones you have." A new throw pillow. "It'll add some color to the living room, dear. The current palette is quite drab." It wasn't subtle. None of it was subtle. And every visit came loaded with questions about my job, about our future plans, about whether we were considering having children, and more pointedly, about my finances. It became clear this wasn't just curiosity. This was reconnaissance. James brushed it off. "She's always been like this," he said one evening after she left. "When Tracy got married, Mom did the same thing. She asked a million questions about her husband's business. She even made Dad draft a prenup to keep her family money separate." "Is that why she keeps asking about my finances?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He laughed, not catching the growing knot in my stomach. "Probably. Mom's just old-fashioned about this stuff. Family money stays in the family." And that right there was the moment I knew. I was right to keep my inheritance private. Diana wasn't just a nosy mother-in-law. She was a woman who saw me as a financial risk. As the weeks rolled on, Diana's little check-ins became more frequent and more invasive. What started as polite afternoon visits turned into full-blown interrogations under the guise of friendly conversation. She'd smile sweetly as she complimented my choice of curtains, only to follow it up with, "So, dear, what's your long-term financial plan? Publishing isn't exactly recession-proof, is it?" I'd answer calmly, firmly but vaguely. "I'm doing quite well, actually. I'm up for a promotion next quarter." But it didn't stop her. Every conversation circled back to one thing. What assets did I have, and what were my future financial plans? It was like she was mapping out a spreadsheet in her head, calculating whether I was an asset or a liability to the Bennett family. Then came the comments about children. Oh, the Bennett grandchildren have always had the very best, she'd say, with a meaningful glance at me. Private schools, trust funds, legacy investments. We believe in building generational wealth. I'd nod politely, pretending not to catch the subtext. But one afternoon, it went from passive aggressive to downright aggressive. Diana sat in my living room, sipping tea, her posture as stiff as her tone. James was out running errands. That's when she leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice as if we were co-conspirators. Your grandmother's apartment, she began. It's in a decent area. Did she leave you anything else? Family jewelry, stocks, other properties perhaps? I blinked. Just personal things. You know, memories. She smiled, but it was tight. Controlled. Family legacies are so important to preserve. The Bennetts have always been very careful about keeping assets within the family. I wanted to scream. This wasn't curiosity. This was a financial reconnaissance mission disguised as chit-chat. The breaking point came a week later during a family dinner at the Bennett's mansion. Richard James's father was discussing a commercial property deal he was considering for the family business. He talked about zoning permits, rental yields, market trends, and I couldn't help but chime in. Property values in that area have been trending upward for the past 5 quarters, I said casually, especially since the rezoning approval last spring. Every head turned. Diana's eyes narrowed like a hawk locking onto prey. You seem quite knowledgeable about real estate, she said, her smile razor sharp. For someone so young, I shrugged, trying to downplay it. I've learned a bit from managing Grandma's apartment. And, you know, dealing with the condo board. Diana repeated, setting her wine glass down with a soft clink. I thought you lived in an apartment building. My stomach twisted. Slip, big slip. Yeah, technically, it's a condominium. I just call it an apartment out of habit. Interesting, she murmured, her tone icy. James never mentioned it was a condo. Those can be quite valuable, depending on the location. I shifted uncomfortably. It's not that big of a deal. But the damage was done. Over the next few days, her questions became sharper, more specific. Suddenly, Diana knew names of mutual acquaintances who lived in my building. She casually mentioned recent property sales in the area. She even asked point-blank who my grandmother's financial advisor was. It was like watching someone circle a target, closing in, step by step. Then, the moment that confirmed everything. It was a Wednesday morning. James had left early for a work meeting. I was getting ready for a Zoom call when I realized I'd left my watch on the kitchen counter. As I walked back toward the kitchen, I heard Diana's voice. She was on the phone. She didn't know I was home. Yes, I need everything you can pull on Eleanor Reynolds' estate, she said, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. Property records, trust filings, probate documents, anything. My sources suggest there might be more than just the one apartment. Yes, it's important. Family security is at stake. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest. She was actively investigating my inheritance. When I confronted James about it later that night, he laughed. I mean, yeah, it sounds like Mom, he said, brushing it off. She probably just wants to make sure everything's in order. You know how she is, protective of family assets. I stared at him. Why would that be any of her business? He raised an eyebrow. Babe, she did the same thing when Tracy got married. She ran a full background check on Michael's family business. It's her way. Her way is invasive, I snapped. James sighed. I know. But it doesn't mean anything. She's just looking out for the family. But to me, it meant everything. It meant I needed to protect myself, fast. The very next day, I called Frank Wilson, my grandmother's attorney. the man who had handled all her affairs for decades. I scheduled an urgent meeting. Frank, I said, as soon as I sat down in his office, I need to make sure my inheritance is bulletproof, locked down, untouchable. Frank nodded slowly, folding his hands together. Your grandmother anticipated this. That's why she set up the properties the way she did in a trust with you as the sole beneficiary. I breathed a small sigh of relief. That's good, but is it enough? We can add more safeguards, Frank said firmly. We'll strengthen the trust, draft documents that make it crystal clear these are your separate assets, immune from any marital claims or meddling. Perfect? I nodded. Let's do it. Now. Over the next week, we reinforced every legal protection around my inheritance. Ironclad, bulletproof. The properties were placed in a trust that remained 100% separate from any marital assets. I updated my will, created a living trust, drew up detailed documents outlining the premarital nature of everything. I even added layers of security at the property management level. Nothing could be changed without multi-factor authentication and in-person identity verification. But even as I took those steps, the tension at home kept building. Diana's visits grew more frequent. Her questions grew more aggressive. And James started getting defensive. Every time I tried to establish boundaries, he'd wave it off. You're overreacting, he'd say. She's just trying to get to know you better. But deep down, I was starting to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake marrying into this family. And what I didn't realize was that Diana was already several steps ahead, planning a move that would blow this entire situation wide open. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. James had left that morning for a week-long business trip to Chicago. As he loaded his suitcase into the back of the taxi, he gave me a quick kiss goodbye and smiled. Try to use this time to bond with Mom, he said, completely oblivious. Maybe have her over for lunch or something. I forced a smile. Yeah, maybe. In truth, I was relieved. A whole week without Diana. Yes, please. My plan was simple. Catch up on work. Handle some minor maintenance at the waterfront property, maybe indulge in a little self-care. Quiet. Peaceful. That peace lasted exactly 2 days. At 3:17 p.m. On Friday, the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, assuming it was a package, or maybe the contractor dropping off samples. But when I opened the door, my stomach dropped. There she was, Diana Bennett, standing there in a tailored cream pantsuit, hair perfectly set, makeup flawless. And next to her, a man I didn't recognize, mid-50s balding, holding a leather briefcase with the awkward, tight-lipped smile of someone who knows they're part of something uncomfortable. Darling Diana beamed with fake warmth, stepping forward before I could even react. I hope we're not catching you at a bad time. I blinked. This is Mr. Peterson? She interrupted, motioning to the man with the briefcase. He's our family notary. May we come in? Before I could answer, Diana swept past me like she owned the place, heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Mr. Peterson shuffled behind her, offering me a polite but apologetic nod. I was actually in the middle of a work call. I lied, desperate to regain some control. Maybe you could come back later. Oh, this won't take long, Diana replied sweetly, already making herself comfortable on my sofa. She set her designer purse on the coffee table like it belonged there and gestured for Mr. Peterson to do the same with his briefcase. It's actually quite important. For the family, she added with a tight smile. Every instinct in my body was screaming. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I crossed my arms, staying standing as they settled in. What exactly is this about? Diana folded her hands delicately in her lap. It's about family security, dear. As Bennetts, we have certain responsibilities to protect what generations have built. She nodded to Mr. Peterson, who opened the briefcase with a quiet snap and pulled out a stack of legal documents. These, Diana said, her tone turning brisk, are simple family trust documents. All Bennett assets are protected through our family trust. It saves tremendously on taxes, streamlines management, and ensures everything remains within the family line. A cold wave washed over me, and this concerns me. How I asked my voice sharper than I intended. Well, Diana smiled. As James's wife, you are now part of the family, and we've recently become aware that you have some assets that should be properly protected. The blood drained from my face. My mouth went dry. You investigated me, I said flatly. Diana waved a manicured hand, like I'd mentioned something trivial. I made some inquiries, yes. It's standard for the family. And it seems your grandmother was quite generous, wasn't she? Her lips curled into a smile, but her eyes were cold. 3 properties, not just the one. Quite impressive. For a secretary to accumulate. The disdain in her voice was unmistakable. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was shaking. My grandmother's affairs are private, as is my inheritance. Nothing is truly private when family security is concerned. Diana replied smoothly. These documents simply transfer your properties into the Bennett Family Trust for protection. Mr. Peterson slid the papers toward me, his face carefully blank. If you could just sign here and initial each page, he murmured, like he'd done this dozens of times. I picked up the top document with trembling hands. The legal language was dense, but not dense enough to hide the truth. If I signed this, I would be handing over control of all my properties. They would be folded into the Bennett Family Trust, managed by Richard and Diana, not me. I'd still have access, sure, but ultimate control gone. My jaw tightened. Did James know you were planning this? Diana's smile twitched the first crack in her porcelain facade. James understands family obligations. He knows these matters are best handled by those with experience. Translation number. James had no idea. I set the papers down carefully. These properties are already in a trust. I said, voice low but firm. My grandmother established it before her death. Diana's smile tightened even further. A limited family trust can't offer the same protections ours can, she said quickly. Our financial team manages millions. They can maximize your returns far better than your grandmother's small-town attorney. And there it was. The condescension. The assumption that I was naive. That I could be bullied into signing away everything. At that exact moment, my phone rang. James. I stared at the screen, then picked it up, hitting speaker. Hey, everything okay? His voice came through cheerful. Yeah, just wanted to check in. Mom texted she was stopping by to drop off that wedding album. I locked eyes with Diana, whose fake smile didn't even flicker. Oh, she's here, I said, keeping my voice steady. Along with a notary. They've brought some documents for me to sign. To transfer my inheritance into the Bennett Family Trust. Silence. Then James's voice sharpened. What inheritance? Diana jumped in smoothly, still composed. James, darling. I was just explaining to Natalie the benefits of proper family financial protection. It seems her grandmother left her quite a portfolio. 3 valuable properties that would benefit from structured management. 3. What? James sounded stunned. Natalie? What is she talking about? I closed my eyes, briefly, then answered. My grandmother left me 3 properties when she passed. This apartment, plus 2 others that are rented out. I placed them in a trust as premarital assets. I didn't tell you because, well, we can discuss that later. I shot a glare at Diana. Right now, I'd like to know if you were aware your mother was bringing a notary here to have me sign over my inheritance while you're out of town. Silence. Then James exploded. Mom, what are you doing? Diana's calm slipped for the first time. I'm protecting the family, James. As I've always done. These assets should be properly managed under the Bennett name. No, don't do anything. I'll be home tomorrow, James said, his tone clipped. Mom, I swear don't push this. The line went dead. Diana stood abruptly, her expression hardening into something sharp and cold. You've put me in a very difficult position, she snapped, gathering her purse. My financial independence, I said slowly, is not a threat to this marriage. Diana straightened her jacket. Think about it, Natalie. Refusing to cooperate could have implications for your future with James. My jaw dropped. Are you threatening my marriage? I'm pointing out, she said crisply, that harmony in marriage comes from alignment on important matters. Finances. Family legacy. James was raised with certain expectations. As she moved toward the door, she glanced back over her shoulder. Mr. Peterson will be available tomorrow, if you reconsider. And with that, they were gone. The moment the door shut, I grabbed my phone and immediately called Frank. You are not going to believe what just happened, I said, pacing the floor. I need to document this, now. Frank listened carefully. Then he said the words that made my heart settle just a little. Don't worry, Natalie, he said. Your assets are secure. But you were right to call me. Let's make absolutely sure. The second I hung up with Frank, my next call was to the property management companies for all 3 apartments. Effective immediately, I told them, I want to add maximum security measures on my accounts. No changes, no authorizations. Nothing happens unless it's verified by me in person with multi-factor authentication. They didn't ask questions. They just did it. Then I sat on the floor of my apartment. No, my apartment, staring at the closed door where Diana had just walked out. My heart was still pounding. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure whether I was furious or just stunned. No, I was both. Furious because Diana had crossed every boundary imaginable. Furious because James had no idea. And furious because a part of me wondered if I'd waited too long to make all of this clear. But also stunned because, even after all her little comments, her passive-aggressive digs, her veiled questions, I hadn't truly believed she would try something this bold, this aggressive, this blatant. She hadn't come over to drop off tea towels or criticize my throw pillows. She came with a notary. She came to take everything. When James walked through the front door the next afternoon, a full 2 days early, he looked exhausted. His hair was messy. His tie was half loosened. His suitcase looked like it had been packed in 5 frantic minutes. You should have told me, were his first words. No hello, no hug, just that. I stared at him, arms crossed. You're right, I should have. And we'll talk about that. But first, I gestured toward the couch. We need to talk about what your mother did. James sighed heavily, dropping onto the couch like the weight of the world had landed on his shoulders. Mom says she was trying to help. She said incorporating your properties into the family trust would protect them. Tax benefits, asset protection. That's what she told me. I sat down across from him, eyes locked on his. Did she mention the part where that means she and your father would control them? That I'd lose decision-making over everything? That I wouldn't be able to sell, rent, refinance, or do anything without their approval? James ran a hand through his hair, looking like a man stuck between a rock and a grenade. No, of course not. She just made it sound reasonable. It wasn't, I snapped. James, she brought a notary to our house while you were out of town to pressure me into signing over my inheritance without even telling you. He rubbed his face with both hands. She's always been like this. When Tracy married Michael, it was the same thing. She pushed him to sign a financial agreement folding his business into the family trust. Did he? I asked quietly. James sighed. Eventually. At first he resisted, but Dad offered him a senior position in the company with certain conditions. I sat back. So basically, financial leverage. James didn't argue. He didn't defend it. He just sat there, silent, heavy. They use money to control everyone. I said, my voice soft but deadly serious. It's not support. It's not family. It's control. His eyes finally met mine. I know. The weight of that admission hung between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then James finally said it. This isn't the first time Mom's done something like this. I tilted my head. Meaning, my aunt, Dad's sister. Aunt Cynthia, he said slowly. She married a guy my mom didn't approve of, and she had inherited a bunch of valuable art from their grandmother. Mom did the same thing, tried to pressure them into putting it into the family trust. And I asked, they refused. And then, suddenly, Uncle Robert's contracting business lost all of Dad's company contracts. Every single one. Out of nowhere. My stomach twisted. Are you serious? James nodded grimly. Yeah. Uncle Robert and Aunt Cynthia had to move to Oregon. Couldn't afford to stay. The family barely talks to them now. I sat there stunned. Your mom sabotaged their livelihood. James gave a bitter little laugh. She'd say she didn't. She'd say it was just protecting family interests. But yeah, that's what happened. I swallowed hard. And you're okay with that? His head snapped up. No. No, I'm not. I never was. But you don't fight my mom without consequences. You just keep your head down. Keep the peace. I stood up, pacing. James, I need to ask. If I had signed those papers, would you have been okay with it? His face crumpled. No, I swear. I didn't even know about it. I had no idea. And honestly, Nat, I didn't know about the properties either. And that hurts. But I get it now. I do. The room fell quiet again. The tension was thick like a pressure cooker about to blow. Then I took a deep breath. We can't live like this. We can't live under her thumb. James nodded slowly. You're right. We need help, I said. Professional help. Therapy, mediation, something. To my absolute surprise, James didn't argue. He didn't scoff. He didn't deflect. He just nodded. Yeah, okay, let's do it. And just like that, something shifted. It wasn't perfect, not even close. But it was the first time I felt like James was standing with me instead of stuck between me and his mother. Our first couples therapy session was awkward, weird, uncomfortable, but it was also clarifying. The therapist wasted no time cutting through the polite smiles and vague answers. This isn't about your mother, she said plainly, looking at James. This is about boundaries, about your marriage, about the two of you deciding what kind of family you want to build. James looked at me, really looked at me, like he hadn't in weeks. I want a partnership, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Not a merger, not a power play, a real partnership, built on trust, even if that means standing up to my mother. And in that moment, I believed him for the first time in weeks, maybe months. I actually believed him. That conversation in the therapist's office became a turning point for us. For the first time since this entire mess began, James and I were sitting on the same side of the table, literally and figuratively. And the more we dug into it, the more James began to unpack things he hadn't even realized were shaping him. He started to admit how much pressure he'd felt growing up, how his mother used money not just as a resource, but as a weapon, how love in the Bennett household always seemed conditional, tied to compliance, to doing things the family way. I watched my dad cave over and over again. James confessed in our third session. Every time Mom wanted something, even if it didn't make sense, he'd give in. Because if he didn't, the silent treatment, the guilt, the manipulation. It was easier to let her have her way than to fight. The therapist nodded thoughtfully. And how did that affect you? James sighed, running his hands through his hair. It taught me that conflict in this family isn't allowed. You go along to get along. You don't question the system. Then she turned to me. Natalie, when you didn't tell James about your inheritance, what were you protecting? I didn't even hesitate. Myself, my autonomy, my sense of safety. I've seen what happens when money gets tangled up in relationships. And once I met his family, I knew. If I didn't keep it separate, it would get swallowed. James reached over and grabbed my hand. I get that now. I really do. For the first time since the honeymoon, I actually started to believe we might come out of this stronger. But if I thought Diana was going to take this lying down, I was sorely mistaken. The next week, she unleashed what I can only describe as her personal army of flying monkeys. First came Tracy James's sister. She showed up unannounced one morning, armed with a box of pastries and a bright fake smile. I just wanted to check in, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You know, see how you and James are doing. Mom mentioned there was some confusion about the family trust. Confusion, right. Tracy sat on my couch, making herself at home, and launched into a carefully rehearsed speech about how joining the family trust was the best decision she and her husband ever made. It just makes everything easier, she said sweetly. Fewer fights about money, more security. And honestly, fighting Mom on financial stuff never ends well. I offered her a tight smile. Thanks for the advice. She left an hour later, clearly frustrated that I wasn't biting. Then came Richard, James's father. He called James and invited him to a father-son lunch. Sounded innocent enough, but when James came home afterward, he looked wrecked. They're restructuring the creative department, he said flatly, dropping his bag by the door. I blinked. What does that mean? It means, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. My position's being redefined. Less pay, more travel, more client management. Unless, he trailed off, unless what I pushed. Unless I agree to step into a new role. One that requires me to take on more ownership responsibilities within the family business. And guess what? That role comes with trust obligations. My stomach dropped. You're kidding, I wish, he muttered. It was clear as day. This wasn't just a business decision. It was punishment. A warning shot. Fall in line or suffer the consequences. They're doing this because of me. I realized the words barely more than a whisper. James didn't even deny it. Yeah, pretty much. And it wasn't just work. The pressure seeped into everything. Dinners became tense. Conversations became clipped. James started working later, and later coming home exhausted, drained, sometimes smelling faintly of whiskey. We weren't fighting exactly, but we weren't connecting either. It was like there was this invisible wall between us, built brick by brick, out of stress pressure and unspoken fears. Until one night, the dam finally broke. We were sitting in total silence at the dinner table, barely touching our food. The air was thick, suffocating. And then James finally said, barely above a whisper, You know, this isn't the first time Mom's destroyed someone's life. I set my fork down slowly. What do you mean? He stared at his plate, voice flat. When Dad's sister, my Aunt Cynthia, married her husband, Mom didn't approve. Cynthia inherited some really valuable art from their grandmother. Mom tried the same play, pressured them to fold it into the family trust. My eyes narrowed, and when they refused, James's jaw tightened. Suddenly, Uncle Robert's contracting business lost every single job that came through Dad's company. All the referrals, all the accounts, gone, overnight. I sat back, stunned. That's evil. James laughed bitterly. Yeah. Aunt Cynthia and Uncle Robert had to move to Oregon. Couldn't survive here. The family barely talks to them now. Mom would say it wasn't personal, just protecting the family's financial integrity. And you're okay with that? I asked, quietly testing him. His head shot up. No, God, no. I never have been. But you don't fight my mom. You survive her. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then I finally said, I don't want to just survive her, James. I won't. His eyes locked onto mine. And for the first time, I saw something shift. A decision. A line being drawn. I don't either, he said softly. Not anymore. The very next morning, James did something that absolutely shocked me. He turned to me over breakfast, barely a sip into his coffee, and said, I'm calling Mom. Today. I want her to come over. Alone. No lawyers. No notaries. Just her. I nearly dropped my mug. Are you serious? He nodded, jaw clenched. Yeah, it's time. We're going to set some boundaries. Clear ones. And for the first time, I believed him. We spent the next hour preparing not just mentally, but physically. We rearranged the living room furniture so that 2 chairs faced the sofa. A subtle but clear message. James and I were united. A team, sitting side by side. Diana arrived exactly at 2:30 p.m. Sharp, of course. She stepped inside, perfectly dressed, in a tailored navy blue pantsuit with gold jewelry that practically screamed, I'm important. Her hair was flawless, her lipstick impeccable. Her eyes scanned the room, quickly, noting the seating arrangement. Her lips tightened, but she didn't comment. James, she said, with her usual performative warmth, offering him her cheek for an air kiss. Natalie, Mom. Sit down, James said, his tone polite, but firm. Different. Not the usual appeasing James she was used to. She sat on the couch, setting her designer purse carefully beside her. I hope this means you've both come to your senses about the family trust, she said, smoothing a wrinkle from her pant leg. No, James said calmly. Actually, this is about something else. Boundaries. Her smile faltered slightly. First, James continued, Natalie's inheritance will remain in her separate trust, as her grandmother intended. Period. This isn't negotiable. Diana blinked. Twice. Her composure cracked for a fraction of a second before she recovered. James, you don't understand the complications. I do, he interrupted, his voice sharper now. And second, we need to establish very clear boundaries about family finances. Our marriage is a partnership, not a business merger. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing, her voice sharpened. You've turned my son against his family. Before I could respond, James leaned forward. Stop. This isn't about Natalie versus the family. This is about respect. You went behind my back. You brought a notary to our home while I was out of town. You tried to coerce my wife into signing over her inheritance. That's not okay. That's not how family works. For a long moment, Diana said nothing. Her face was tight, controlled, but her hands fidgeted, something I'd never seen before. Then her mask slipped. Those properties should be under family control, she snapped. Do you even understand what we could do with those assets? The waterfront property alone could be leveraged for the expansion Richard has been planning for years. There it was, the truth. It was never about protecting me or the family. It was about bailing out the business. You researched the properties, I said quietly, the realization settling like ice in my chest. You know exactly what they're worth. Diana didn't deny it. The Bennett family has worked for generations to build financial security. When opportunities arise to strengthen that foundation, we take them. That's how successful families operate. James's eyes darkened. Is that why Dad's pushing the expansion so hard? Is there something you're not telling me about the company finances? Diana's hesitation told us everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight. Your father has made some investments. They didn't perform as expected. Gambling debts, James said flatly. Not a question, a statement. Diana's eyes widened. They are not gambling debts. Stop lying, Mom, James said, his voice dead serious. I've known about Dad's problems since college. I found the casino markers in his desk. How bad is it this time? Diana's mask shattered completely. She sagged back against the couch, suddenly looking older, smaller. Nearly 700,000, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The company is leveraged to its limit. The banks won't extend any more credit. We need collateral for a bridge loan until some client payments come through next quarter. I stared at her. My chest tightened. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place. The notary, the documents, the pressure. It was never about family security. It was about saving the company. It was about saving Richard from himself. James let out a long, bitter breath. Why didn't you just ask us for help? Diana straightened, squaring her shoulders. Bennetts don't ask for help, she said stiffly. We solve our own problems. I shook my head. Well, that approach clearly isn't working. And trying to steal my inheritance sure as hell isn't the answer. James nodded, squeezing my hand. Here's what's going to happen, Mom. Natalie and I, we're willing to help. But on our terms, not yours. Diana blinked, caught completely off guard. You would help after everything. Under conditions, I clarified, my tone sharper than steel. First, Richard gets help. Professional help. For real. No more pretending. No more promises. James jumped in. Second, I'm leaving the family business. Diana gasped, hand flying to her chest. James, no. You can't leave the company. Not now. Yes, I can, he said firmly. I've been offered a position at Meridian Marketing, and I'm taking it. But the company needs restructuring, professional management, not nepotism, and not me. James leaned forward, locking eyes with his mother. We'll offer support. We'll use one of Natalie's properties, the downtown apartment, as collateral for the loan to stabilize the company. But, he raised a finger, there will be legal contracts, ironclad, protecting Natalie's ownership, protecting our marriage. And the minute Dad refuses treatment, or the minute you try to cross any boundary, the deal is off. And one more thing, I added, crossing my arms. You owe me an apology. A real one. Not a fake smile. Not a backhanded compliment. A real apology. For the invasion of privacy. For the manipulation. For everything. Diana sat in stunned silence. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have a comeback. Then something happened that I absolutely did not expect. Her eyes welled with tears. Not the controlled, elegant tears of a woman seeking sympathy. Real tears. Her hands trembled as she pulled a tissue from her purse. Everything's falling apart, she whispered. Richard keeps promising to stop, but he doesn't. The company's bleeding money. Tracy and Michael are talking about moving to Seattle. I was just trying to hold everything together, the only way I know how. For the first time, I saw Diana, not the manipulative mother-in-law, not the ruthless financial puppet master, but a scared woman. Desperate. Clinging to control because it was the only thing she'd ever known. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made her human. We're offering you a real solution, James said quietly. A better one. Not control. Not manipulation. Collaboration. Isn't that better? Diana nodded slowly, silent, small. The ice had cracked. The following weeks were intense. James and I sat down with Frank, my attorney, and with the Bennett's corporate lawyer, though strictly on our terms. Every conversation was documented. Every agreement was notarized. No verbal promises, no vague nods, only black and white legal clarity. The deal was simple but firm. I offered my downtown apartment as collateral for a bridge loan to stabilize the company. But that property remained 100% in my name, within my trust, protected from any future claims disasters or manipulations. The paperwork was airtight. Frank made absolutely sure of that. In exchange, Richard agreed for real this time to enter a professional gambling addiction treatment program. Diana surprisingly backed this without her usual resistance. Maybe because she knew deep down that there really weren't any options left. And James? James handed in his resignation. He was done. Done with the family business. Done with the manipulation. Done with the generational chains disguised as tradition. He took the job offer at Meridian Marketing, the same position that had been waiting in the wings for months. His new salary was higher. The creative freedom was better. And most importantly, it had nothing to do with the Bennett legacy. When James told Richard and Diana, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. After everything we've done for you, Richard exploded during the meeting. You're just going to walk away from your responsibilities. I'm walking away from your responsibilities, James replied, cool as ice. The ones you and Mom have tried to make mine for years. It was the first time I'd ever seen him stand taller than his father, literally and figuratively. Diana tried her usual guilt trip. But the Bennett name, James cut her off, is not more important than my marriage or my sanity. I couldn't lie watching him say that. I'd never been more proud. For a while, things were tense. The air around the Bennetts felt different, brittle, like the weight of all their unspoken dysfunction was finally being acknowledged, and no one really knew what to do with that. But change started happening, slowly but surely. Richard begrudgingly entered treatment. It wasn't pretty at first. There were shouting matches, late-night phone calls, and one very dramatic moment where he threatened to walk out of the rehab center only to be coaxed back in by a very patient therapist. Diana, for her part, started attending therapy too. Her first session, according to James, was a disaster. She reportedly spent the entire hour explaining how everyone else was the problem, but she kept going back, and somewhere along the line, the ice started to melt. James thrived at Meridian. For the first time since I'd met him, he came home smiling, energized, talking about new projects, new clients, and not once about family politics. I kept doing what I loved, working as an editor at the publishing house, but with a newfound peace. And with James, now fully supportive of my independence, we started looking at properties together, not because we had to, but because we wanted to grow something together, on our terms. A few months in, with the company stabilized, and everyone adjusting to the new boundaries, Diana did something that left me completely speechless. She invited us over for dinner. Nervous, didn't even begin to cover how I felt walking into that house. But as we sat down to dessert, a surprisingly normal, tension-free meal, Diana reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I've been doing some thinking, she began, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it, about how I was raised, about how my mother instilled in me the belief that money equals security, control. She slid the envelope across the table toward me. I don't want my grandchild when you have one growing up with those same chains. I blinked. I don't understand. Open it, she said softly. Inside was the deed to a small beachfront cottage, a property I had never even known existed. This was my grandmother's, Diana explained. She left it to me. I was supposed to pass it on to the next generation when the time was right. I'm giving it to you and James. Not in the family trust, not tied to the company. It's yours, fully, no strings, no conditions. My mouth opened, but no words came out. It was a peace offering, a real one, a genuine acknowledgement of the boundaries we had fought so hard to set. James reached over and took my hand under the table. His eyes were glassy. "Thank you, Mom," he said quietly. Diana nodded, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a napkin. "I want to be a different kind of grandmother than I was a mother. I want to be someone my future grandchild knows, not as the woman who holds the purse strings, but as someone who loves them." I wasn't sure whether to cry or hug her or both. For the first time in a very, very long time, it felt like something truly had shifted. When we left that evening, walking hand in hand to the car, James turned to me and squeezed my hand. "You realize you changed the entire trajectory of this family." I let out a shaky laugh. "Not alone." "No," he agreed. "Not alone." A year passed. 1 year since Diana showed up at my front door with a notary trying to hijack my inheritance. 1 year since James and I stared down the generational dysfunction of the Bennett family and said no more. And looking back, it almost didn't feel real how much had changed. Richard had completed his gambling addiction treatment. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he stuck with it. 6 months sober, regular meetings, therapy, and slowly, the man who used to live with his head buried in denial began showing up, really showing up for his family, for his employees, for himself. Diana? Well, she was a work in progress. She wasn't suddenly a saint or the world's most nurturing mother-in-law, but she was different, softer in some ways, less intrusive, less manipulative. And when she did slip back into old patterns, because let's be honest, people don't change overnight, she caught herself. Most of the time, she was even still in therapy. That alone was something no one, including James, ever thought they'd see. James, he was thriving. Leaving the family business was the best decision he ever made. His new role at Meridian wasn't just a job, it was a passion, a career where his creativity was valued, his ideas respected, and his workload didn't come with strings attached to family expectations. And me, I'd been promoted, senior editor. I now managed a team of junior editors at the publishing house. The work was challenging, rewarding, and best of all mine, something no one could ever take away or claim partial ownership of. The properties. They continued to generate steady rental income, enough that James and I had started looking for our next investment, a small fixer-upper we could renovate together as a weekend project. I had taken the lessons Grandma Eleanor taught me and carried them forward, but not just the lessons about money, about independence, about protecting what's yours. It was the lesson about knowing your worth, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. Then, one sunny morning, as James and I sat on the porch of the beachfront cottage, Diana had given us a property that now symbolized healing instead of control. I handed him a small white envelope. He blinked. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a pregnancy test. Positive. James stared at it for a moment, like his brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. Then he looked up at me wide-eyed. "Are you?" I nodded, tears already welling. "We're having a baby." He launched out of his chair, lifting me into his arms, spinning me around as laughter and happy tears mixed into the salty breeze. The joy in his face, I'll never forget it, ever. Later, as we sat curled together, watching the sunset over the water, James laced his fingers through mine and whispered, "I want us to do this differently. I want us to raise our child with everything we didn't have. Not just security, but freedom, independence, Love without conditions. I nodded. Absolutely. And I want to set up a trust for them, like Grandma did for me. Something that gives them security, but doesn't come with control attached. And we teach them. Chaisama Ari. James added that boundaries are love, that respect is love, that you can care for someone without owning them. It was the start of a new chapter, a completely different kind of legacy. When we told Diana and Richard the news, something truly unexpected happened, Diana cried, but not out of control, not out of manipulation, pure, genuine emotion. I want to be a different kind of grandmother, she told me, holding my hands tightly in hers. Not the one who nags about trusts and assets, just someone who's there, someone who loves your child unconditionally. And you know what? I believed her, maybe for the first time. I truly did. We spent the months preparing not just for the baby, but for the kind of family we wanted to build. James and I finalized the trust for our child, not the kind of trust Diana had tried to impose. Ours was designed to empower, to educate, to provide safety, but also to teach responsibility. We also set up a charitable foundation in my grandmother Eleanor's name that would provide financial literacy workshops for young women, giving them the tools to build their own independence, to create their own legacies. When the paperwork was done, James leaned back in his chair grinning. It's perfect, a real legacy, not just for us, but for everyone this foundation will help. I squeezed his hand. It's what Grandma would have wanted. The day our daughter was born, everything changed. Holding her in my arms, this tiny perfect human, I realized that everything we'd fought for wasn't just about protecting property, or money, or inheritance. It was about protecting her future, protecting her from a legacy of control, from the suffocating belief that love had to come with conditions, from the idea that family means ownership. No. For her, family would mean support, empowerment, boundaries, and most importantly, love that asked for nothing in return. As James sat beside me in that hospital room, holding our daughter, with tears streaming down his face, he whispered, "She'll never have to wonder if she's enough. She'll never have to fight for her independence, because we'll teach her it's hers from the start." I smiled through my own tears. Exactly. And as I looked at her, this tiny miracle, I realized something else. The real inheritance I'd received wasn't the apartments. It wasn't the money. It was the wisdom, the courage to stand up, to protect what's yours, to build a life on your terms. That was the legacy. 1 year later, as I sat on the porch of the little beachfront cottage, the same one Diana had once handed over as a peace offering, I rocked my daughter in my arms, staring out at the sunset. The sky was painted in streaks of gold pink and deep purple. The waves lapped gently against the shore, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt truly, deeply at peace. James stepped outside, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. He set one down beside me and kissed the top of my head before sitting down. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come." I nodded, smiling as I watched our daughter's tiny fingers curl around mine. Yeah, same. I look back at everything we went through, and it feels like another life. James chuckled softly. It kinda was. It was true. His family, our family now, was practically unrecognizable compared to where we started. Richard was still sober. A full year and counting. His recovery hadn't just saved him, it had saved the company too. He'd hired a real CEO to take over operations. Someone with actual experience who wasn't related by blood. The business was running better than it had in years. Diana was still well Diana, but she was different now. Therapy had cracked open pieces of her, she never knew existed. She was less controlling, less judgmental, more present, more real. She still slipped sometimes. Old habits die hard. But she caught herself. She apologized when she crossed lines. And for Diana, that was massive. And Tracy. She and Michael ended up moving to Seattle after all. Not because they were running away from the family drama, but because they were finally ready to build something on their own terms too. Watching James stand up had inspired them more than I think anyone realized. James reached over, brushing a thumb across our daughter's cheek. She'll never have to fight the same battles we did. No, I agreed. She won't. Because we were setting things up differently from the start. We'd established her trust fund, but it wasn't just a pile of money waiting for her. It came with education, with mentorship, with lessons about independence, responsibility, and boundaries. And the Eleanor Reynolds Foundation, it was thriving. Workshops, seminars, scholarships. Young women were walking into our building every week, some scared, some skeptical, and walking out with a fire in their eyes, learning how to manage money, how to read contracts, how to protect themselves in a world that often told them they shouldn't. Every time I walked into the foundation's office and saw that plaque on the wall in honor of Eleanor Reynolds, who taught us that independence is the greatest inheritance of all, I felt a lump in my throat. James turned to me, his voice softer now. You know, my family used to believe that legacy was about money, about assets, about keeping everything locked inside some big trust fund with our name on it. I nodded. Yeah, I remember. But you showed me. Legacy isn't about ownership. It's about empowerment, about freedom. I smiled. Exactly. He leaned over, kissing me gently. I'm proud of you, Natalie. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes. I'm proud of us. For a while, we sat there in comfortable silence, just watching the waves, listening to the soft breaths of our daughter as she drifted off to sleep in my arms. Then James chuckled. You know, the way Mom tells the story now, you'd think she was the one who taught us all about healthy boundaries. I burst out laughing. Of course she does. Classic Diana. But honestly, James added, even if she rewrites the narrative in her head, I'm okay with it. Because at the end of the day, the outcome is what matters. I nodded. Yeah, we rewrote the script, and we had, for ourselves, for our daughter, for the generations to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in soft shadows, I whispered a silent thank you to Grandma Eleanor. Thank you for the inheritance. But even more, thank you for the wisdom, for the strength, for the reminder that protecting what's yours isn't selfish. It's survival. It's empowerment. It's love. And to anyone listening, maybe someone like you, I want you to remember this. Protecting what's rightfully yours isn't wrong. Setting boundaries isn't rude. Saying no, this is mine, isn't greed. It's self-respect. It's the legacy we leave behind. Have you ever had to protect something or someone from people who felt entitled to it? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that independence isn't just about money, it's about freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, the most valuable inheritance isn't the property. It's the power to protect yourself. It's the courage to say no. It's the wisdom to walk your own path. And that is worth more than anything money can buy.